Hi, Southwoods. Mrs. Lindsay back again with more functions. Reasonable domain and ranges. Let's face it, we all want to be reasonable. But what kinds of domain and ranges are reasonable? So I'm going to go away and we'll get to it. In word problems, the situation determines the domain and range. You have to read the question carefully. Look at the story to find the reasonable domain and range for each of the functions. In the function f of x equals 175 plus x, this represents the amount of money in a savings account that started with $175 after a deposit of x dollars. What are the reasonable domain and ranges of the function? Well, it gives us a good clue here when it says that the deposit of x dollars. That's a clue right there, that x is the domain. So the domain is the deposit. That's going to be the independent variable because you decide how much money you want to deposit. Okay? So the domain is the deposit. That's the independent variable. But there's a restriction on this domain, right? In our money system, we deal with money that's a decimal to the nearest hundredth. So that means our restriction has to be rational numbers. And not only that, they have to be positive rational numbers because we're not going to deposit negative numbers. So the restriction on the domain is positive rational numbers because our money system is based on decimals to the hundredths place. And that's a rational number. The same idea for the range. Now, what is the range? In this case, the range is the f of x, and the f of x represents the amount of money in the savings account. So the range is the money in the account. And the restriction on the range also has to be a rational number, but that rational number has to be higher than $175 because our bank account starts with $175. So the range is the money in the account, and that has to be at least $175. So the restriction on the range is it's got to be a rational number such that f of x is greater than or equal to 175. Second problem. Elaine is in the business of repairing home computers. She charges a base fee of $50 for each visit and $25 per hour for her labor. The total cost, C of x, for a home visit and x hours of labor is modeled by the function rule C of x equals 50 plus 25x. Now, right off the bat, we can see that she charges $25 per hour. So that's a clue for me right there, that the number of hours is independent. She's charging $25 per hour. It seems like she's going to be able to control the number of hours that she puts in on her labor. And every time she works an hour, it'll be $25. Also, it says here in the problem, the home visit is an X hours of labor. X hours of labor. X is normally the independent variable or the domain. So if she works more hours, she gets paid more times, $25. To me, the domain, that's the number of hours. That's the independent variable. Now, what's the restriction on that? Well, I will say that in most businesses, the person will work for a full hour or charge the full hour. We don't charge fractions of hours. Even if we work a little bit more than an hour, the person would charge for the entire hour. So Elaine will charge for a whole hour. She's not going to charge for a fraction of an hour. So the restriction is the domain is going to be whole numbers, but they have to be greater than or equal to 0. Well, that's a little bit redundant because whole numbers actually are greater than or equal to 0 in and of themselves. You don't have to repeat that. Okay? So this is a little bit redundant here. So it has to be a whole number. It has to be positive. Now, what about the range? The range is the C of x. C of x is the total cost. It says right here in the problem, right? And that makes sense. That's how much she is going to earn. She gets $50 regardless of whether she works, plus $25 for every hour she works. So the range is going to be that total cost. The restriction on the range will be, although it could be rational, it's going to be a whole number, because in this case, the cost will always result in a whole number. We're only adding whole multiples of 25. So we can't come out with anything other than a whole number. Also, it has to be greater than or equal to $50, because she gets $50 regardless of how many hours she works. So the range is the total cost, and the restriction on the range is the whole numbers such that f of x is greater than or equal to 50. Third example. The function f of x equals 10 minus x represents the amount of change you receive after paying for an item that costs x dollars with a $10 bill. So you buy an item for x dollars. You pay for that item with a $10 bill. You receive change. That change is going to be f of x. So your domain has to be something that can be paid with money. Your domain has to contain money. And in our money system, money is rational number to the hundredths place. So it's a decimal to the hundredths place. So our domain is going to be the cost of the item, and the restriction is it's going to have to be rational. But there's a little more restriction than that. Your domain, you can't buy the item for more than $10. You only have a $10 bill. So the restriction on that is going to be rational numbers between 0 and 10. And it could be equal to 0 and it could be equal to 10. So 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 10, rational numbers is the restriction of the domain. Now let's discuss the range. The range is the change you receive. The change you receive is the dependent variable. The change you receive depends on the cost. So what happens is the clerk subtracts 10 minus the cost of the item and gives you change. So your change will also be money. It'll be a decimal rounded to the hundredths place. But it also can't be more than $10. So your restriction on the range is it has to be rational numbers between 0 and 10. So 0 less than or equal to f of x less than or equal to 10. So in conclusion, first thing, you identify the domain and range from the words. Decide which is the domain, which is the range of the two variables you're talking about. Then second, decide the number set that's appropriate. Is it rational numbers? Is it whole numbers? Then identify any reasonable restrictions that may fit the story. If you only have a $10 bill, then your rational number is going to be a rational number between 0 and 10. And we can write that as an inequality between 0 and 10, or you can write it in interval notation. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow. We'll have a lot more examples, and we'll answer any questions that you might have. So signing off for now. See you tomorrow.